Climate Change Summit COP27 held recently in Sharm el-Sheikh has a main focus. It is meeting the obligations of the Paris Agreement on climate change and explore how the private sector and NGOs can play a role in financing green investments. Foreign Minister and President-designate of COP27, Sameh Shoukry, said that Egypt is committed to working hand-in-hand with all parties to address climate change and its related negative impacts, and to ensure the availability of sustainable and credible investments required in this regard. Shoukry added that COP27 builds on the momentum of COP26 that was held in Glasgow in October 2021. The foreign minister asserted the need to push forward all efforts to meet climate action goals by 2030 by closely collaborating with the business community on the global and domestic levels. He also affirmed that Egypt is working closely with the US business community in the same area. The Egyptian government's efforts on climate action are crystal clear. That includes legislating new laws and amending existing ones to support green investments, setting environmental regulations for all business entities in the country, issuing MENA's first ever green bond at $3.7 million, enacting a waste management law that encourages investors to pump investments in this area, and including green finances in the action plans and policies of the banks operating in Egypt. Meanwhile, US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Action John Kerry said that the world is not on a good track in terms of dealing with the severe impacts of climate change, adding that the current usage of coal is responsible for about 90% of the warming issue. Although natural gas is important for green transition, the world needs to go faster and cleaner by capitalizing on renewables and technology solutions to address climate change and to meet the goal of reducing the global temperature by 1.5 degrees by 2030. The business community has the ability to drive the green transition and to utilize its financing to reach innovative and good solutions for climate change. The private sector can structure the required financing for this transition and do what the governments cannot do. There is an essential need for collaboration between the private sector, banks and financial institutions to secure the required finances going forward. Also, adaptation, mitigation and finance are the major issues that all countries have to focus on in their climate action efforts.
Welcome back, and back to you, Dr. Khaled. And we were speaking about the adaptation file and what we have reached in that. Let me here take it from another perspective. Let me here take it from the perspective of the draft resolutions on the Green Climate Fund and the climate measures regarding agriculture and food security, because that is very important. Plus, a coal, or let me here take it from, we are aware of the geopolitical circumstances and the developments, particularly because of a pandemic followed by a war and economies and how things are developing, pertaining pledges that were made before. But also, we are speaking about, or some of the world leaders, particularly developing countries, spoke about the importance of engaging the private sector into the adaptation and the finance issue. First, let me take here, these are two parts. So we'll speak about the conference draft resolution on the Green Climate Fund and climate measures regarding the agriculture and food security, plus of course water, because that was another important, very important file. And then we'll speak about a role that could be played by the private sector.
From the beginning, Egypt has declared that it will be speaking for Africa and other developing countries. And Africa's worries are majorly concentrating on adaptation and how to face the impacts, the negative impacts of climate change. In particular, because Africa is the most vulnerable continent in the world, and they produce only 3% or 4% of the greenhouse gases. So, I mean, that was a big issue. We had already established adaptation fund, but the problem is that the money is not flowing, okay? And still the concentration is on mitigation and not adaptation. So, and even what has been offered to the developing countries are far less than the $100 billion that was promised yearly. In addition to that, the costs of adaptation have risen drastically, and we are expecting the cost to be $300 billion a year until 2030. And by no means the African countries will be able to meet such costs. And this is why Egypt has came out and was voicing what the African really need, and they came with the resolution at hand, which met to a large extent the expectation of the African and developing countries. The problem is, how will we implement this? Guys, it was already hard to get the consensus. But when it comes now, how will this be implemented? Because the industrialized country, here I use the industrial, especially the G20 and the G7, have made it clear that 80% of climate action money or finance will be coming from the private sector, not from the public sector, not from the budgets
of the states,
but will be coming from private sector. Now we know two facts. Private sector is not a party of the convention. These are states. Private sector comes for a profit. This is not a charity. So the challenge will be, how could African countries and developing countries in general be able to establish an investment environment that attracts the private sector, which means that we have to undertake a lot of institutional arrangement and policy reforms so that we can attract the private sector.
In other words, a win-win situation.
In other words, a win-win situation, but full of challenges.
Indeed.
And requires solidarity between the rich and the less rich countries so that we can implement this. So this is why we need a mix of finance. We need new financing. And here came the proposal of Egypt, or the initiative of Egypt on the NOFI program, which introduced
the program, yes.
Which introduced a new mechanism that's built on mixing private sector with concessional funding with budget resources, and focusing it on a certain projects that are related to the three important things: energy, water, and food security. Okay. That's one way. But there is a lot of changes, there is a lot of challenges, there is a lot of work to be done so that we can implement this. And here is where we should work together in achieving this. This is not a push-button process. This is a reform. It's a complete reform.
When you spoke about NOFI, that was a very important initiative that was really launched during this COP27. And in parallel to that was another important initiative, which was the smart and green projects or
Smart
initi-
agriculture?
the green and smart projects,
Yes.
and a fund that was raised particularly for that.
Yep.
Can we know more about those two initiatives? Because people would not understand how relevant are those two initiatives to what we're speaking about.
We must differentiate between two things. The initiatives that on the side of the conference and the resolution of the conference.
But it seemed at then that even the big powers were speaking a lot about North.
No problem, but speaking as individual, we're not speaking as the parties. The parties are negotiating, and we come with the resolution and the articles they have approved. They will say, and they will mention new financing mechanism. Okay. Now the initiative brings to the table the new or propose a new mechanism, such as NOAFI. This is our new mechanism. You don't put them in the articles. They are not in the articles. Okay? So that's one thing. And that's like, for example, the hydrogen project, the green hydrogen project that were signed. This was not part of the convention or the agreement. This was on the side. These are the things that on the side, and shows that Egypt is giving a model for moving from talk to implementation. We did not wait until we finished the negotiation. We were not waiting for donations or whatever. We stepped in and we agreed with the private sector on huge investments, and that was a work of 2-3 years. This was not work of a couple of weeks or a couple of days. So we must differentiate between the two things, because the agreement and the initiatives. The initiatives are initiatives. They are a proposal how to do it.
Actually, within the framework of implementation, and with regard to the situation, initiatives could also be included if they work out, particularly when there is a consensus.
Included where?
In the convention, right?
No,
No?
we know that the Paris does not have invention initiatives. Okay? These are things that group of several countries
Agreed on.
agree مثلا with the Bank of the Reconstruction. The World Bank. The World Bank is not a party
Yes,
of the
but
convention.
the African
These are things, but
yes.
definitely they are very important because they show to delegations that this is the way for implementation. Okay. They give you a solid example and a practice how these things could be done. And they serve, of course, the targets of the convention and of agreement. Yes, they do.
Right. If we get back to the Paris Agreement and regarding the clean development or green energy, and Egypt gave a role model for that. I mean, despite our limited financial or our, of course, our limited resources of finance, but we have been able, for an instance, to grow to expectations and develop the green hydrogen, which is very much requested. How do you view efforts made by Egypt, and how can this be a role model in dealing with renewable at this upcoming stage? How important has that become?
If we leave climate issue aside and talk about energy, because really energy is the spearhead when it comes to addressing climate change.
Yes, indeed.
Because most of the emissions are coming from the energy or the use of energy resources. So,
Indeed.
energy and renewable energy was already in Egypt's plan in 2014, 2015. And the big jump and the big work that has been done to prepare for that was done in 2015, 2016, and it started yielding in 2017 and 2018. So the Egyptian government was aware of this and has worked on changing the mix, the energy mix, to go more for renewable and to set very ambitious target, 20% by 2020, by 2022, and 43% by 2035. Now, these projects are within our strategy for climate change, and we added to them the green hydrogen. The green hydrogen, Egypt has a very competitive advantage in producing green hydrogen and turning it into the application of urea, green urea, and urea as a fertilizer. It's needed for food security all over the world.
Agriculture.
And fuel for ships, methanol. So these are the two applications. From the numbers of big corporates that signed framework agreements in Sharm el-Sheikh that will produce 37 megawatt. We're producing now 24 megawatt. 37, that will mean a drastically change this. And Egypt is going in this direction, is going into green transport, is going in electric vehicle. So Egypt is on the right way. But we need to work more and speed more because we need more policy reform, more institutional setup, and that's what Egypt is working with the European Construction Bank, the EPRD. EPRD is working on that, and the strategy will be announced soon so that we move. So we have to move fast. We have an advantage, but the challenge is how fast could you move?
Indeed. I have only one minute left for me here, and in this one word, what is the hope? What do we need to hope for at this upcoming stage?
From a climate point of view, the hope is to have a just transition, green transition. For a sustainable development, we need a more justful world to live in.
And I would end with that. Dr. Khaled Fahmy, former Minister of Environment, we thank you so much for being with us and for
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Dear viewers, many thanks for watching. Tomorrow will be another important debate with another colleague. Good night.